So, Steve, I want to focus while you're here, while we got you. I want to focus in on the Toronto Expo. So that'll be kind of our main focus of the conversation. Now we'll shift a little bit over, so we'll focus on that. Obviously,
Sure.
looking forward to it. Basically, as somebody who's attended a bunch of these, so that's always a fun thing for me. Now, obviously, we've got a couple of things, and a couple of things that that you can maybe help me out with. I'm curious about it. Obviously, we're going to go back to the two hall setup. So we're going to have the two halls, and then right now the way it's structured, we're going to have the line in between. So similar to last fall, we're going to have that. So is it the same configuration, or are there going to be a little bit of a difference, nuances between last time and this time?
Well, same configuration as last fall, only in, I'm trying to think of a quick and witty analogy, but my wit has pretty much left me the last couple of days. Yes, there are two halls with a connecting hall, but that's as far as the analogy goes.
Okay.
The connector hall is much nicer, much bigger.
Okay. Sure.
The second hall is much nicer, much bigger. We have the experience of last year and some of the things that didn't work well that we're changing. So we're proactively going after that. The content of both halls is really compelling. The way that we've split things up, we've got dealers, lots of dealers in both halls, and we're just being ready for anything. Without trying to cover everything in one answer, we've got one of the best guest lists ever. So we feel there'll be strong traffic in both ways, and I'm doing a lot of other things promotional wise and just communication wise to let people know what the configuration is going to be, and lots of signage, lots of communication, lots of the new show app, etc. All things to literally and figuratively point people in all directions.
No, that was a really good answer because it actually covered one of the follow-ups directly related to that. Because even with a different configuration and a strong autograph lineup, and it is really strong. So I have a follow-up question with you about that in 1 second. But before that,
Sure.
obviously the signage is going to be really critical. That was a thing that obviously I saw
Yep.
because I remember it. Is that obviously I ventured over there, but I didn't run there at the beginning, and a lot of other folks had the same thing. Obviously, if you're going to see autographed guests and something, you were in the area and stuff. And I know some of the dealers had a little bit of a struggle getting as much traffic just because it felt like a disconnected section, just the way it was. And it's
Yeah.
good to hear that the interconnection is a little bit better. If the signage is better as well, that's going to be more. And with the amount of guests, it feels like there's so many guests all throughout the show. It feels like that's a lot of potential traffic. You're basically driving in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the above. I mean, and it's been that's all been conscious. There was certainly a learning and a takeaway from last fall was the fact that it's great that we have lots more people, lots more dealers, lots more attendees, but there's still things that need to be improved. This has been thought out versus just a reaction.
Good.
Which
Okay.
is kind of what last year's was.
That sounds good. So, in that same vein, was the extensive autograph guest list an intentional? Was it just the opportunity presented itself, or was like an intentional thing going, hey, if we have a really strong guest list, that helps in a couple of ways. Obviously, we can do well with that, but also it does drive traffic to that other hall. Like there'll be a lot of folks that'll be there just for that.
Yeah, good question. That's not why we did it, but quite honestly, I go to all the other shows. I think that we've had great guests in the past. I think that we have a lot of guests that perhaps aren't up to what I would consider par. So the conscious effort was made to elevate the overall guest list and have this is with no disrespect to any of the individuals, to have more higher end guests and fewer kind of filler guests. So that part's intentional. Kind of changed the structure a little bit, and kind of asked all the autograph providers to really up their game, and they all have. They all answered the call, and I'm very pleased with the way it's turned out, and with the ultimate result being probably the best guest list ever.
Okay, I think that's good. Now, Bobby, I know you have a couple of questions, so I want to give you a chance to take a couple of questions in there. I have a couple that I'll follow up with some of the guest list after, but we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Bobby.
Oh, okay. Hey, Steve. Yeah, I had a question. I know with timing and everything, do we foresee a magazine coming out in the future down the road?
I thought you'd have at least.
I gave you the future
before that, but yes,
he has to have one self-serving question. We have to give it to him. It's important.
It's not self-serving. I think it's for everybody, to be honest.
Absolutely. And listen, I love it. I'm excited about the app, but I love the magazine, and I have come to really appreciate and respect all elements of that. And there's so many people that are longtime and new collectors that love both elements. Not to digress too much off the answer, but during the virtual, there were as many quote unquote long time and old guys that embraced that format as new. And similarly, everybody seems to like the magazine. The problem with the last three shows has just been
I know.
the lead up has just been too tight. So I absolutely want to bring the magazine back, and as soon as I can, again, without creating another question that I'm going to have to answer next, is as soon as I can figure out my haul, which will determine my dates, and vice versa for spring, I'll get to work on the magazine. But yeah, the short answer is yes, I value the magazine and want it back.
That was the sort of leading question. I guess because I know you didn't update the list or the map until recently, and I know with the magazine coming out, it has to be about a month prior to that. So I respect and understand that. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is this are we in an ideal venue at this point, or is there something in the future that we may move into, or is this another?
Well, that's the
are
ongoing.
we going to determine?
Yeah, I mean, I always have to be careful what you wish for. I mean, in a couple of years, even before COVID, or the few shows,
we're just throwing stuff around, Steve. Don't worry.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's casual.
In the shows before COVID, I was thinking, geez, I'd really like to try that hall too. It would allow me to do more. It's bigger. Try some new things. I would be less locked into the kind of the inherent and the inherited configuration that the expo had always had in Hall 5, and then COVID comes and COVID semi goes, and we're forced into a different hall for last fall, forced into another hall for last June, and now back into an old hall that's different plus not big enough. So I don't know
growth
what the right
has been
answer
exponential. Sure, yeah, it's hard to accommodate.
Yeah. So ideally, we'd have a scenario like the National gets to deal with, where they've got a 500,000 square feet of space that they can use and add to and take away from as needed. I mean, literally, they decide they want 20,000 square feet more for the trade night, they get it, and they get it, probably for free in some of the venues. So I don't have that same luxury, but yeah, I want to see how this configuration works, and then we can decide on where spring should be. I think it's most important to be in the right weekend, and I look for a lot of feedback from dealers ongoing, dealers and the manufacturers and everybody else as to when that should be. I quite liked being in 2 in June, and it didn't have as big an impact, but most of the feedback I got was that the spring show fits best early May, like late April, early May, for a lot of reasons. And I may not do a lot of things right, but the things I do like to do is listen to my dealers, and for the most part, that I've done well when I do that.
Yeah, and the final question I had, which you actually already kind of stepped into, was the trade night. If you want to explain a little bit more about the trade night, where people may understand it a little better, who are visiting and who are watching, who are in the
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and there are very few things that I invent, and especially not in this hobby. And it's more just, it's why I go to so many other shows and events, and not just in this hobby, but in others. And as many of you may or may not know, I come from, prior to this, I've been running the Comic-Cons, and there's a lot of things that carry over really well from there. There's some that don't, but there's some that absolutely do. And trade nights have grown, again, exponentially at all the events, and I'm thinking particularly with the National, but certainly at other shows like Dallas, like I was at the Burbank show earlier a couple of months ago, and similarly that they had one. So it's an opportunity for it started, I think, very very grassroots, and it's becoming more formalized now, where guys get together after the day and sit and trade. But there's as much commerce done as there is selling and trading. So we have kind of an official trade night that we're doing on the next Saturday night with Mint Inc. as a lead sponsor.
And that's the one that's in the venue, basically
it's in the venue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Literally, when you come in the venue, the ballroom where you've always gone for ticketing, it's the ballroom right beside it. So, and again, all the signage will point to that, and it's a trade event, but it's also a social event. I mean, there's DJ, they'll be breaking good high-end boxes. There's great prizes. There's food and beverage, etc. So it's basically extending the card experience.
Beer? Will it be beer?
Yep. Beer,
there we go.
pizza, all the essentials of life.
The essentials of life. What a coincidence. Thank you for mentioning it. Question for you. Kind of a question for you in the same vein of the trade night. Just a question for that.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where I'm supportive of it because I think it is an interesting thing, an interesting aspect of the show. One of the interesting observational pieces, I don't participate in it, but I think it's a great thing, especially if it can be supported, especially if it can grow. I think that's all really good. That's always excellent. But here's the question that I have. I have found that, and maybe it's the combination of the venue, because when I think of the National and I think of the trade nights, I think one of the things that has always been very helpful for it is the proximity of the hotels and nearby
Yes.
to the venue. And that's not something we can do about. The way that the International Center is set up, I have lived in Mississauga my entire life. I've known the International Center since the mid 90s. I have attended more than 50 iterations of that show. So long before you ever took it over, Steve, I've been attending that show for 4 decades, and that makes me sad. That makes me very sad. But the point is, I've seen almost every hall, almost every configuration that has been tried up until this point, and I think you've done an excellent job in adapting and working through it. So I want to give you kudos and congrats for that. The trade night though is tricky for me because I'm supportive of it and I want to see it succeed. But I always feel like that the inconvenience of it relative to its American counterparts, I think holds it back. And it's not because you've done anything wrong. It's just harder to pull it off compared to somebody.
100%. I mean, and I support all kinds of activations in and around the experience. And again, the ultimate kind of example for this is San Diego Comic-Con. Yes. And literally the entire city of San Diego embraces Comic-Con. I mean, restaurants have Comic-Con themed menus and everything is in close proximity. You can walk from the hall to your hotel, to the restaurants, to the entertainment district, so on. There's not a lot of walking done in and around outside of the International Center. November is not as conducive to walking around with your pals to restaurants as it is, July and in August or Atlantic.
And in fairness, the closest restaurants are fast food, so it's not the same as you can actually go get dinner and then come back for trade. Right. It's not the same thing.
Right, and which is why food had to be an essential part of it. So I can control what I can control, and I can't impact the other things. So there's pros and cons. We're close to the airport, but on the other hand, it's not conducive to that.
No, that's fair.
So from that standpoint, impact what I can.
No, that's fair. I just thought I would ask you because it's one of those things. I'm gonna keep observing it, and I'm hoping that we'll keep seeing growth. I think it's gonna be a slow and steady thing. I don't think we're gonna hit one day where it's suddenly explode. I think it's gonna have to be a gradual thing over time because of the difficulties inherent to what we have, the limitations.
Yeah, I think with the National, it grew out or it grew organically, and then the organizing team at the National just realized, hey, we should capitalize on this and leverage it into something that's event related because it was happening anyway. Again, based on the proximity, guys just started sitting in the hotel lobbies and trading. So, it's. I mean, I looked at it and thought, geez, my worry is, are the dealers going to be upset if there's all these guys that are coming in and trading, buying and selling for free? So that's something I'm aware of as well. Yes. Little less so when there are more dealers that can't get in. It gives them an opportunity to do that. And again, as you guys all know, many collectors are dealers and vice versa. All dealers are collectors, but it's all things to be aware of. And the good thing from my perspective is that I do look at it as from a non-collector or from the dealer's perspective as well, but I don't get caught up in just because I'm not a collector at heart. I'm able to be objective in terms of how I look at it and say, all right, is this best for all the stakeholders?
Well, if it turns out really well, then can I set up a booth selling Pelican cases next? So, anyways,
listen, you missed out. I saw a couple of guys that were actually doing good business doing that, and they built it into kind of a side thing with it's not a bad.
I've been missed out. It's still Canada.
It's an opportunity. There's still a chance. There is still a chance. I think it's still plausible. Okay. So Steve, kind of a separate question, pivoting back to kind of the setup that you've got right now going for the show, and I'll bring up the actual floor plan. I've got it here, so I'll kind of zoom in on it a little bit. And obviously, we're seeing a couple of the setups and some of the design choices in the way that the hall is set up. This one's a new one because I believe, to my knowledge, it's never been tried this way before. So I think it's kind of interesting. So in this case, we've got the third-party graders all lined up. We've got them all kind of on the side in their own. So basically, if you want to do any on-site grading where it's available, or you want to do submissions or whatever, you've got them all lined up with each other. And then obviously we got Grosvenor, JSA, ComC, Universal Distribution. They're all kind of set up on that side. So what was the thought process behind doing it this way and this time around?
So the thought process started with, okay, I know I've got, in June we had 125,000 approximately square feet. This hall that we're going back to, Hall 5, was 100,000 square feet. They've taken out almost 5,000 square feet for a food court. So even before we started, I lost almost 10% of the booths that I had just from that change alone. So I knew it wasn't all going to fit. So I started to look at, all right, what can I do differently? For years, again, or for many shows, I've been contemplating saying, you know what, the Autograph Pavilion would really be a much better fit in the ballrooms at the front of the venue. They're carpeted, it's better lit, it's a nicer a place for stage, and the acoustics are better and so on. So that was the original plan, to move the Autograph Pavilion up there, and then it just kind of naturally felt, and I wanted to have more dealer space. So again, in prior shows, I'm sure you guys had noticed, Upper Deck and the corporate kind of created an invisible wall behind which nobody really wanted to be behind as a dealer. So I moved that back, and then I thought, okay, I know that grading is such an important and big draw of the show, of all shows and of the hobby, that this would be an interesting thing to try. And I spoke to representatives from most of the grading companies and said, here's what I'm thinking. Would you be open to it? So created what we're calling the grading and authentication zone, where I always think, what's the best thing for the consumer or the collector? And that's why, for example, in any show, in any industry you want to look at, it's not a car show if all the key manufacturers aren't there. Mm-hmm. It's not CES unless most of the manufacturers are there. And sure, occasionally you're going to get an Apple spin-off or something like that, but the same thing here. All the endemic all the endemic brands and companies should be involved in a show like this. So it worked out well. Everyone was open to it and agreeable to it. So it created a great zone. The authentication is also there. The submissions through ComC and PWCC is also there, a little bit further out of the space. But and then we also have iCert there on the authentication side. So really, the whole hobby is really well represented.
No, I think that's going to be very interesting. I think it'll be indicative. It'll be a good opportunity to kind of see, because we'll see how that traffic goes. I think it is helpful that people kind of, once they go to the show, if they're going for multiple days, they know very quickly where they want to go in order to get whatever they want done. If there is an authentication thing or a submission thing, they buy a card and they want to go get it submitted. Well, then you already know exactly where to go. Regardless of which one you want to do business with, you're already in the right lane, so to speak. So I think that's going to be very interesting as far as that's concerned.
I would say that the majority, by a margin, of the two biggest categories of inquiries that we get on social and or emails and so on are grading, questions about grading, and then of course guest-related questions. And more than ever, the grading questions have been key. Who's doing what? What can I get? What are the prices? All those kinds of things. So, the great thing is that the more graders there are there, the better the competition, the better the experience for everybody, and it raises the experience, I think, for all collectors.
Very good, very good. Now, kind of a side question. You did also mention, obviously, we mentioned the autograph lineup and how strong it is and the variety of different. I saw a whole bunch of areas covered, so that was great. I'm a big Medano fan, so it's great. So it's great when we get the Medano appearance as well, so that's great. But also, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, are there any panels or anything? Because I feel like I heard some content creators are going to do some stuff at the expo. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So again, one of the things that I really liked about the whole Comic-Con experience is the panels, is the stage and the Q&As, and it's actually every guest that signs at a Comic-Con, or at least the ones, the Fan Expo brand and so on, was required to do a Q&A. And the great thing is that actually benefits everybody. It benefits the fans, but quite honestly, it benefits the celebrity or in this case, the athlete. It gives people a greater experience. Yeah, you know what? I want to go and get my photo with so and so, or just so it does help sell autographs. The financial model in the sports world is quite a bit different in that there might be on time deals or everything else. So they look at it and say, well, that's 15 minutes that I can't be signing, or that's 40 pieces I'm not going to get for my inventory. So that's taken some movement, but I committed, for several years ago now to doing the Q&As because I think it adds value. Mm-hmm. It adds to the experience. I want more things that are more experiential, and not everything has to be transactionally based. Not everything at the event has to be a buy or a sell and so on. So I think this is just better for everyone.
Okay. No, that sounds good. Now, question from the athlete.
No, I was going to say, and so there are the athlete Q&As, and then there are so many more content creators in the space now that it's relevant. There's so many things so many new people to the hobby that want to learn about all aspects of the hobby. So there's a lot of crossover stuff that really speaks to the hobby as well. So we've got several panels on things like the future of the hobby and all the different key elements. So content creators like Jeff Wilson, sports card investor, and the Chasing Cardboard guys, and so many great guys that are there that come to the show anyway. It just, again, it's a part of the hobby that's really important, and I think it's really well valued.
No, I agree 100%. And thank you for kind of bringing that up, because that's kind of what I wanted to
Yeah.
ask is that,
Sure.
the Jeff Wilsons and the Chasing Cardboard guys, that makes a lot of sense because I'm very familiar with their work in the space. And obviously they've got great social media following. So that certainly makes a lot of sense with it. So is it a situation where you pitched ideas for panels, or is it a case where you guys reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in doing? I'm just curious what initiated the transactions that were to set up these different panels, who was going to be involved in, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It's seeing who's popular, who's relevant, who's interested, who's coming. I mean, we're pitched as much as we're pitching other people. So again, I don't really claim to invent a lot in this hobby or to be necessarily new, but I do, and I always have. I look outside into other industries as well to see what's key and what's happening. And one of the things that we're also doing, we've created a motorsports pavilion,
Yes.
which first time for any hobby show that I'm aware of. But again, that's not new. But you look at all the things that have happened within the space over the last 2 years, and again, much like the Last Dance impact had on sports and cards, so too did Drive to Survive. That's had a tremendous following, and it's kind of funny how North Americans are learning all about the new sports of F1 and football, or soccer. We're discovering the two biggest sports in the world, and so I was trying to actually get some soccer players to come. Wasn't able to do it this time, but so the motorsports thing kind of fell into my lap in that regard. But I think it's really compelling, and to see what's happened with motorsports and F1 in particular, cards in the hobby, it's been really interesting. And then who's not excited to see it? Like, we're going to have an actual F1 Lewis Hamilton show car there. There'll be a Lewis Hamilton signed helmet. You can get your photos with both, and so it's a bit of an experiment, a bit of a gamble, but I think that's what I need to do. I think people will be excited by it, and ultimately people will decide whether it's something that they want to see again or not.
Well,
That's really great. I think it's not even a thing that inventing something. I think it's more being innovative to the invention of what people are bringing to market and utilizing it your way. So I think that's really good, Steve, going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, kind of in the same vein, it's better trying things. At least trying things, you'll be able to get the feedback. You'll be able to see if it works the way you want it to, if it's something you expand upon or something you kind of move on a little bit. So it's one of those things where we'll have to kind of see how it plays out. I think it's good though that you try. In the same vein, I'm supportive of the idea of trying. I chuckle a little bit because Paul is a big F1 guy, and he's very excited that I had to listen to someone talk about F1. I tease him about F1 all the time. Not an actual sport, Paul. I have to give him a hard time, but I'm still supportive of it because I know there are people who do enjoy it. I know there are people who, and anything that gives the people something that they can enjoy while they're at the expo, I think that's a good thing. I think just in general, I think that's great. That's
absolutely. And the timing. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying the timing of the expo works well to the end of the F1 season. Plus, it's leading into World Cup as well. As I said, I wasn't able to get soccer players, but then I'm not a huge sports guy in the way that many people in the hobby are, but I pay attention to the business of sports and sport, and I watch with a lot of interest on the whole NIL space and really what impact that's going to have, and it's a much bigger deal, of course, in the U.S. But I thought the same idea. Because I heard a lot of the guys speak about you can probably get a lot of community. When I say community, more regionalized athletes that are really big players. So I started to look at that, and a lot of these young athletes also have tremendous social media followings. So I thought about, all right, are there other people that fit into that wheelhouse where maybe we can get there's a couple of girls that play twin sisters that play basketball at one of the U.S. colleges. So I thought that might work. And then again, related back to this motorsports thing, the same group that's bringing in the motorsports pavilion works with a young female driver, a girl by the name of Menzie, and she's now a pro racer. She's going to be attending, but she's got over 1 million social media followers. So again, it opens up the show and the hobby to a wider audience. So
no, I think that's fair.
Interesting things to try. Yeah.
CFL. Is there any older guys that we can Yeah. Hey, there's a few good guys, you know.
I went to the 100 Grey Cup, Bobby. No,
Okay.
no, I know. I'm just teasing.
There's
But
a few. There's a few good
there
guys.
are a few, and there would be
Yeah.
an
And they'd be
audience for it.
local.
To be
Yeah.
fair, there would be an audience for it. I can almost guarantee that. There's some diehards. Trust me, one of my best friends is a super diehard, and he would be thrilled
It's been
if there was
very
that season.
few over
Yeah.
the years.
Yeah.
I can't even remember one, to be honest with
I
you.
think people would be interested in seeing Doug Flutie come back.
Well,
to
Doug Flutie would be a good
Toronto.
crossover.
Yeah.
He's at
Yeah.
least got the NFL. He also has the collegiate
Right.
football history, so he'd be kind of a good
Theismann.
crossover. Yeah,
Theismann, there you go.
yeah.
well, but-
There's a
and
couple
yet-
of guys.
And yet Theismann didn't sell very well as an autograph guest a couple of years ago when he was here.
Yeah.
And one of the most
right, yeah.
interesting guys I've met. But
Yeah.
but again, I looked. I used to deal with Lou Ferrigno on the Comic Con side,
Mhm.
and Lou had a short stint with the Argos, so there's that crossover appeal. So I'm
Rock?
looking for.
What about The Rock?
He hasn't returned my call yet, but
Well, we'll have
he
to keep
may.
working on that one, Steve. It's like we're
Yeah.
all in the same boat. We're trying to get The Rock to return our calls, but
Yeah.
it's fair enough. But that's a crossover. That's a different level of crossover, no doubt.
Absolutely.
Kind of a little bit of a sideways question, because it also plays into kind of some of the stuff you've done in the past. Obviously, the expo, something setting up like this, and all the different initiatives and thing you're trying, that is a lot of planning. However you want to slice it, it's a ton of work, a ton of planning. And obviously, you also expanded kind of your show portfolio, so to speak, the last year or so. You've got the Western version of Expo, kind of expanding the Western brand. Are you going to keep doing that going into the next year and everything? Is the plan to keep doing that? Because it does kind of divide your attention a little bit. How are you finding the balance of that with additional shows and stuff like that?
Well, listen, I mean, it's. I get a lot of ribbing. People say I only work 8 days a year, so I figured I could at least expand that to 10 or 12.
There you go.
But when I first looked at taking over the show and so on, I had that in mind anyway, to be able to expand. It's like kids, 4 is not marginally more difficult than 3, and now it does require that I spend more time working on the business and just expanding my efficiencies and that kind of thing. And to that end, I've improved a lot of areas, and I've seen from this show in particular all the things that need to be improved going forward, and just automating some of the processes and that sort of thing. So that's where the focus is. It's just like growth in any business, you just got to be prepared to level up accordingly. So the Edmonton Expo this year was very successful. I was really happy with that and got great feedback. So yeah, that's continuing. I'll launch that right after this Toronto Expo happens next week, and then so that's going to carry on. But yeah, I've been getting requests for even pre-COVID to add a third show in Toronto. I've kind of resisted that, but yeah, you got to be open to the growth and see where it lies. It's also about just doing more with what's there. And again, I listen to the dealers as my primary stakeholders, to be honest.
No, I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
In the vein of all the things that you're going to, obviously, there are going to be some experiments. We talked about that F1, the motorsports pavilion, that piece, and a couple of these other ones, and obviously some configuration things and everything. Just out of curiosity, with all the stuff that's going on, and obviously the Fall Expo, we're in an interesting climate. But I think it'll be interesting to see the people that come in. I think we'll still see a number of folks that we, familiar faces and all that. Is there anything in particular from all this stuff, new or old, anything in particular that excites you about this particular iteration of the show?
Most everything that we've talked about. I mean, and there's also the more on the the more macro side of things is just the economy and where that's at and what's happening, and yet we're 50% more dealers than we were pre-COVID, and I still had between 30 and 40 dealers on the wait list. So there's no slowdown in terms of people that want to be there. But even with the last 2 shows, I don't want everybody there to be a dealer. Obviously, we need buyers and so on as well, so attendees. So from that standpoint, it'll be interesting just to see because there has been that dip in the space, but still a lot of volume seems to be happening, and certainly all the kind of lead indicators, if you will, from my experience as a promoter seem to suggest this is going to be another strong show. Ticket sales are as strong as they have been for the last 2.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, those are some of the show never used to have a lot of metrics to track, and there were no advanced sales before I took it over and so on. And so that just helps me understand the business better, and allows me to communicate better, to build my database and that kind of thing. So
Before you took it over, they didn't have email. Anyways,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
it was
Al
one of the
St.
first
Clair was
websites.
just so basic.
Al
You
was
actually
good at a
touched
lot of
Steve.
things,
You actually touched on Steve the actual the follow up question I was going to have, because I was curious, since you do have pre-sales and that does give you a bit of an indicator, because obviously folks want to plan and they have that. You got the different packages and all that. So you basically, from what you said, the numbers are kind of very in line with the last couple of shows, pre-sale wise and everything. You're comfortable?
Yeah.
You good?
Biggest show
absolutely.
ever.
And what's that? I didn't hear what you said.
Biggest
You're
show
saying,
ever.
are you want to commit to biggest show ever?
Well, it is physically the biggest show ever, and
yes.
I would be Now, because we're over, is it 50%? Yeah, probably 50% more physical space. Part of last November that made the show look so busy was that it funneled in a fairly narrow initial hall,
It was on an
which is
angle,
great.
too.
I mean,
Yeah.
visually it looked tremendous. So I think there's still a lot of interest, a lot of entry. I think that'll translate to feet in the door, and I do see, anecdotally and otherwise, I do see a lot of interest from new people that want to get into the hobby. Still get all kinds of inquiries. My husband just passed. I've got this collection. Should I come and set up? How do I do this? How do I grade? There's all those kinds of things that come in.
Nice. Now, a quick question for you, Steve. We talked about this in the past, and you mentioned earlier that you're not as into the sports and into the collecting side of it as much. But you did. But I think in a previous discussion we had, you did dip your toes in a bit. So do you still not collect anything, or have you dipped your toes into a couple of things? At least?
I keep dipping. Yeah, I mean, through COVID, I was doing some things, and I've ended up with some clients that are asking me to help them buy and sell. So I do that, and there were a couple. It's caused me and allowed me to understand the space better and to see what are good buys and what aren't. And I had one client in particular that was asking me to buy things for him, and there were several occasions where he didn't want certain things, and I thought, okay, well, the research I've done suggests this is a good deal. So I picked up some things, and I just bought some. I'm just checking to see if my wife's here, but I just bought some old tickets from. I'm going to show them to you, Brad, on the weekend. But
Nice.
Just bought some old tickets in an auction, and she popped her head in. So I enjoy it, and listen, I tend to be drawn more towards things that have more historic significance and value. And one of the things I'm excited about is Mark Churteau and the Classic Auctions team is going to be setting up a sports museum at this show as well. Because I always talk about the Heritage Auctions booth at the National, which, if any of you haven't been, I mean, that in and of itself is worth the trip to the National, in my opinion. It's just such an amazing display. So it's that kind of experience and things that I'm always looking to add, and Classic's going to be bringing some of that. So that's what I tend to be drawn towards. I like some of the older stuff, the galleries. I like a lot of the Olympic cards, Jesse Owens, that kind of stuff.
No, I think that's good.
I've got some things that I've put in the portfolio.
No, I think that's good. I think collectors appreciate that as the show promoter. You at least, again, I don't think anybody's expecting you to sit there and like build this whole warehouse of sports memorabilia that you collect. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. But I think it's still good to know that at least you have participated in it a little bit. It does give you a different perspective, at least being operating, at least even whatever level it is. As a collector, I think it makes people, okay, at least you understand us a little bit better because you participate in some elements of this business.
Absolutely. And one of the things no, I definitely not. And one of the things I always say is that I love passion. I don't care what you're passionate about. You have to be passionate about something, and collectors certainly are that.
Chocolate sticks.
So, what?
That's an inside joke. Leave that one alone.
Sorry about
Please.
that.
Leave that one alone.
Okay.
It's okay. It's completely okay. I'd rather not explain it right now. I'll explain it to you at a different time.
I do need a magazine though, from the show. There never was. So
You might, Steve. Could you just give Bobby one magazine?
Just
give it for him.
I've got 40,000 of them, Bobby. You can have as many as you want.
I know it's been 2 shows though. So
Yeah.
It has.
So
I'll
quick,
give you-
one
I'm a
other quick
collector. It's like waiting for that. Anyways,
So one other quick question for you in that same vein, and then I'll kind of open it up to the guys or anybody in the chat who has a specific question for you. you do one of the things that we've talked about in the past that I've gotten from the conversations that we've had is that you do as you visit these other ones, you reference Comic Cons, you reference all these different kind of shows. You try to absorb and you try to learn from all these different things, and then incorporate the experiments and all that element of it. Is there anything that you've got right now on kind of the, obviously we're trying a couple of things at this expo. Is there anything you've seen that you think is kind of a cool idea that you'd like to try and maybe haven't had the chance to give it a go for whatever reason?
Good question. There's three things that are at this show next week that are really good harbingers of that. And, it's at the Classic Auction Sports Museum is one. The F1 piece is big because that to me, it's analogous to wanting to do the same thing in soccer, for example. And, I do want to have, I've been committed from the outset that, yes, the show is known as the biggest hockey show anywhere. And I never want to shy away from that. But, the landscape has changed in Toronto and in the space dramatically, certainly even the last 5 years, let alone prior. So I want the sports representative to be representative of that. I do want to broaden the audience. So, to be able to bring in more women players, whether they're hockey, soccer, what have you. I think that's all key. It's interesting to see on the non-sports side. I think there's great opportunities with that. Whether it be entertainment crossover that way, or a lot of the content influencers that are big in the TCG space. So again, nothing tremendous, and I don't want to give away anything that's unique, lest I not be the first one to be able to bring it to market. So, but no, I'm excited about these things and just to see how to make them relevant.
Oh, I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable. I wanted to kind of just set that up while we were finishing up here. Gentlemen,
Sure.
Is there anything else that you'd like to ask Steve? I covered a lot of different ground, different things. I wanted to ask him a variety of different questions. I know, Brad, you're going to be setting up, obviously, with PSA Canada. Bobby and I are longtime visitors. Eric has come down the last couple, this time and last time, so it's kind of fun. So I think that's great. Is there anything, gentlemen, that you want to ask Steve? I want to open it up.
It is the world's biggest hockey show, and we're still fortunate that we still have three of the four greatest hockey players of all time still alive and with us. And I'm curious, have you ever tried to reach out to Bobby, Wayne, or Mario to see if they would be interested in coming to the show?
Well, both Bobby and Mario were there in 2019, actually. So, I hesitate to call this the best list ever because in that one show in 2018 or 2019, we had Cal Ripken, Bobby Orr, and Joe Montana. A pretty tough line to beat. And then another show we had Mario as well. Obviously Wayne would be the holy grail, but that would require things much bigger than I think any of us can impact to have happen. But is that the goal? No, absolutely. Would I love Ken Dryden to come and sign? 100%.
Oh my God.
There's certain guys that are particularly tough for a variety of reasons.
Right?
Certain guys.
Right. Yeah. But you know what? Again, even with that, like there's, I approached Ken a couple of years ago when his last book came out and just, said, don't sign. Just come and talk about the book and that kind of thing. So I'm always looking at opportunities like that. I thought I approached Scotty to see because he and Ken are very close to see if they might do something that way. So I'm always looking for those opportunities. And I think as the show grows and as people see these things being more successful, that those will start to come our way as well. So
absolutely,
Scotty Bowman would be great. Yeah.
And apparently he's got a big collection of things that he wants to get graded and authenticated as well. So
that sounds good. Kind of a related question. Kind of a related question to that one. When you're trying to build out the guest list, because as we said, this is an excellent guest list. Obviously you would try you look for the best player available. It's like the drafting philosophy. If you can get the best player available, you go for the best player available. If the deal is right and you can figure it out, that's awesome. But you do obviously also look at themes. Like you'll see throughout the different things, you'll see like different, famous lines or certain teams or whatever the case may be. So do you kind of, when you're looking at potential and possibilities that you can't have everybody in the world because otherwise it would just be an autograph show and there'd be no time for anything else. But at the same time, do you like focus on themes? Is that something that you like in the back of your mind? Oh, it'd be really kind of neat if we could arrange this. Or is it just best player available predominantly? And if something materializes, hey, go for it.
Well, I certainly don't. But I mean, there's no way you could ignore the 72 theme this year. But again, I'll be honest, it's not me that's coming up with the list of who the guests should be and or what themes we should be focused on. I rely on experts for that. I do have, and I've continued to build it up, is the database of all the players that have ever been there. So if a name is suggested to me, the first thing I always do is look at the historic guest list. Has that player ever been there? And if so, when? And just as an indicator, because there are people like that would make obvious good guests.
Can you look those up in what was it, past magazines? You look them up in past magazines or something?
Do you feel the agenda? Do you sense the agenda, Steve?
It was one question.
Except where the magazine was printed before the cancellations occurred and stuff. Yeah.
Understood.
Nice.
Yeah. And yes, we will have an app coming up, which I may not have mentioned on Monday. So we'll be announcing the app. Again, one of the big initiatives, because the floor plan is so different, I want people to be able to to search easily and quickly. So we'll have printed floor plans, and we'll have an app that people can do to search for dealers, by name and or by booth number. So it would be a great supplement to the magazine.
There you go.
Do you have exclusivity, Steve, with the autograph? Do you have, like, if I wanted to bring in some guests and have them partake in the autograph pavilion, is that kind of open? I know you deal with a bunch of different people, but is that open?
It absolutely is open, and so I've tried a couple of different things. Initially, when I took over, it was AJ's had exclusivity for it. And so since then I've tried a couple different models. Again, I watched and went to the National to see what they do, and and I used to, and I often still reference it as the TriStar model, where it's one company that owns the brand, even though probably half or more of the guests that go to the National are sourced through other agents that bring them to the National, and they're just, so it's basically a key promoter and then a sub promoter. I've elected to go with an overall pavilion brand. So I've worked with UltraPro now for the last 4 years on branding the autograph pavilion, and then I have autograph providers that I've worked with. So I respect and value so I like to show loyalty when it's shown back, and it's worked well. But I always tell everybody as well, absent an exclusivity arrangement, which there's really nobody that can provide that in my estimation for this show. So absent that, I'm always going to be open to, if someone's going to bring me a guest that I can't say no to, then I'm not going to say no to it. If Upper Deck does say, yeah, we want to bring Patrick Waugh, we want to bring Wayne, then they're coming. So that's always a sort of a caveat there. But whatever I do in advance of a show is say, okay, here's what we're going to do for this show, and if something comes up, then this is how we manage it. But it's finding that right balance of of competition and different abilities of promoters to bring different guests.
That's good, and I think that's important. I had one other question too that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
How are you? One of the things that I noticed going to the National per se and a lot of the other shows is during your panel sessions is to keep people engaged. It's kind of embarrassing a lot of times at the National in the US, and I don't mind saying that publicly, but you can go by the stage and there's a Q&A and there's two people sitting there with their feet up on chairs, and me and you seen it in Atlantic City. It gets kind of, people are up there talking and there's nobody there, nobody's engaging. Somehow, do you have that in the back of your mind, how you can keep that from happening, to keep people engaged?
And nobody likes to see that. One of the things that you always worry about for a guest is that when there's nobody there in line and that kind of thing, and it's inevitable. It does happen. So it's how do you manage that? So most of it you try and anticipate that up front. So is this going to be compelling and engaging, and how do you do that? Because that's not what everybody wants. I think and I'm not being critical, but there are some things that I would definitely do differently with the National. I think that the way they set the stage up and then the audience, it's not conducive to that, and there's so much noise and so on around anyway. It's more of a distraction. My biggest thing I don't like about the National is the way they handle the autograph pavilion. I think it's horrifically ugly the way that they do it. And one thing I'm adamant about, I mean, I think, from the day I first saw the movie The Wrestler, I don't ever want to look down on my heroes. There's no way that you should be looking down at, at a player who you idolized your entire life, or a wrestler. So that's one thing that I do. We put them on risers. They're at least at eye level or not, and that just, it literally and figuratively elevates the experience and so on. And they've got proper tables and dressing, and signs that aren't all warped and bent, and I think little things like that just make it a better experience. So I'm very conscious of that. I'm conscious of how it looks and feels. Just because we're in an informal hobby doesn't mean that everything can't look slick and professional. And and for all the things that people worry about, I think the entrance into the space, or the preeminent entrance of companies like Fanatics into the space, is that you're going to see brands elevate many parts of the hobby. So.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that's important. Kind of like when we chat it back and forth, and as you know, we're going to be doing I said it publicly now, we're going to do a customer appreciation night on Friday night from 5:30 to 8. Yeah. So we wanted to do something from PSA Canada standpoint. How can we have a little area discussion? Carlos is going to hold court over there for us, and
allegedly, this is what I've heard.
We're going to have drink tickets. We're going to have some fun. And then when Steve suggested, we can have the Slapshot guys doing the Q&A at the same time, and we'll be on the side. I think that's a way that when you can come to other companies that are there, and you can get them to kind of support these Q&As to keep other avenues to keep people engaged in it. I think it's great. I think
exactly.
I'm confident in the success we're going to have. I mean, when you give someone free drink tickets as well, that always adds to it. But I think also from our standpoint, I think our guests are going to have really have a great time just listening in on the Q&A with the Slapshot guys, and it's going to be very unique. But I think that's a way, and that's why I brought it up earlier, a way for we can keep engaged at these Q&As and have some fun with it, and also from our standpoint, we get a benefit as well. So I think it's great.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, I'm always looking at creating events that are really relevant and authentic for the audience. I intentionally didn't want to have a Slapshot panel at 1:00 on Sunday afternoon. I mean, to me, that audience is a more mature, hot stove lounge kind of approach. Or I'd love to get the Spinning Chicklets guys up and and do a rye testing with Eddie, or those kinds of things that are well suited to and tailored for different segments of the market, because this is a lifestyle hobby, to be sure. So how do you kind of best enhance that whole experience?
I do see a comment there that says autograph guests have become so expensive. But we went over the pricing, I think last show, and I found them to be very affordable. The other part about it, it's not always about the autograph and what have you. It's about meeting the person in person, and I think that's really the major, beyond the autograph at that point. The autograph is the secondary part. It's getting to meet the person, to say that, hey, you met them once in your life. That you have their autograph is great, but meeting them is a personal high for me. The autograph is just a bonus. That's all. And the way I see it, the way I do it.
Yeah. Bobby, I agree. I think the autograph's more like it kind of reminds you of the event. Like,
right.
Bobby hooked me up.
It's a chocolate milk to the chocolate stick. I get it.
Yeah. Bobby hooked me up by introducing me to Bobby Bond last year. And I got a chance to spend a good significant amount of time talking to him. And just, I'll remember the stories he was telling me, how he was playing golf with President Eisenhower. I mean, there's not too many people left in the world that played golf with President Eisenhower. So
that's fair.
I mean, I'll have that memory forever. And I have his autograph. And when I see the autograph, that reminds me of the memory. So the autograph's definitely secondary, but it helps remind you of the interaction, especially if it was positive.
Yeah, agreed. And maybe not a president, but as an American and a wannabe Leafs fan, you'll appreciate the guests that we're about to announce. I guess I can do a little bit of a leak here.
Go for it.
Yes. So Ron Duguay is coming to the show, and he's now bringing a special guest with him. who I don't know if you guys are smiling, you're nodding, you know who it is, but Senate potential candidate Sarah Palin will be at the show. So on Saturday. So
There you go.
that should be interesting as well.
Oh,
We talked
interesting
about
is the
that, right?
interesting is exactly the word that I would use for that. Yes.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. You used the
Yeah.
correct phrase. I agree with you. Yes.
He has Ron Duguay. We talked about this about a month ago on the show. Do you remember? Like, he has an incredible history.
Mm.
His CV is impressive. I looked it up actually when somebody else told me that, and
Absolutely.
Best player in hockey history.
yeah.
I think you've all phrased this very well, and I appreciate you all for phrasing this in the correct manner. I agree with
Well,
you.
yeah, I mean, the American promoter who was bringing Ron and also now Sarah was really puzzled as to why I wasn't more thrilled that such a big name would be coming. And it took a bit of explaining, and I still don't think that it's fully grasped. But yeah, so anyway,
It's simple. It's
consider it another experiment. Right.
Yeah.
Bring her to Texas. People would be thrilled.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that would be thrilled with in Texas. I'm not going there right now. So a question for you, Steve. And this is more of an open-ended question, just kind of a general question. Obviously, one of the long-standing, booths in the corporate section has always been Upper Deck. Obviously, very Canadian-centric show, and Upper Deck is a great, obviously a great get, and obviously Series 1 is going to be coming out for this show, which is always good. For the Fall Expo, Series 1 is really important. It helps drive a lot of things. It helps the economy inside of the room. A little bit of money changing hands.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Back in if I think back to the 90s though, one of the hallmarks of the 90s was at that time, and obviously a different landscapes trading cards wise than today, but back in that time we had all the manufacturers. Obviously we don't have as many now.
Mm-hmm.
But Panini is kind of the big one still out there, and whatever happens with them and Fanatics, that's a different conversation. But is there a possibility at any point where we can have, because Panini has the basketball license, they have the football license, and there is some good stuff that they've got.
Yeah, absolutely, and those are absolutely on my list of gets. I think again to be a show as big as the Expo is in the hobby, it's really compelling that the major manufacturers should be there, and that it goes hand in hand with the license and with the market and with the the sales potential and the reality of that. But I've built one of the big focuses of why I go to the national, why I go to the Beckett Summit and so on, is to get to know all the players in the space more, and I can sing the praises of the show and figure out what it would take to bring them there, because that's what collectors want, that's what fans want, and I think that the landscape is changing in terms of how much those sports have grown within the Canadian marketplace as well. So yeah, it's a matter of time, but it's very high priority for me.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to double check that because it's one of those things.
Yeah,
I assumed that was the case, but I know that's I think something that in the long run, I know hockey will always have a dominant place in where we are, but I know that there are collectors for those other ones, and I know that they would appreciate and enjoy that. Obviously, in the same vein, Tops for sure, like in the baseball side of things.
Sure.
They would love that. I collect baseball myself, so it's one of those things I would enjoy that. I just remember being able to go in the 90s and going to visit Pacific's booth, Upper Deck's booth, basically Fleer when it was still around, Leaf when it was still around, and Pinnacle when it was still around, and they were all there back in those days.
Yep.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, any other questions? Any other questions for Steve here?
No, I think one thing, and again, me and Steve are friends, and not to say, but this show, I travel to a ton of shows, just like Steve, just like a lot of guys, and this show is world class. And I think it's the same thing as we talked about getting Panini and Tops in them there. Once they come and once they see, look at Jeff Wilson. And I'm a fan of Jeff Wilson. I know some people aren't, but I'm a fan of what he does and what he does for the hobby. But he ranked the Toronto Expo. It was awesome to see when he did his top 10 shows of the year, I think last year, and he countdown 10, 9, 8, 7. I was like, I remember when he got to 5, I was thinking, man, I can't believe he didn't put the Expo on there. Like, I just thought, and then boom, like number 2. And he was like, guys, I had no idea. And I think as we all do together, we keep promoting it in social media, getting the vibes. Anyone that steps foot into that show, to me, it's right there with the national. I think more and more Americans are going to be up this year, and they're going to get to experience it. And it's a world-class event. Can't wait for it. So
Thanks for saying that, Brad. And again, a lot more. I mean, the combination of obviously the vaccine restrictions being lifted, and the way that the dollar is right now, I think this is probably going to be and just the notoriety. The Fan Expo, the Expo brand got put into the spotlight so much more during the virtual shows we did during COVID. We had 50% of the people that attended those, and there were almost 12,000 people, had never experienced the show before. And so all those things are really pointing us to it. So those things, I think we're going to see the biggest crowd of U.S. collectors and dealers and buyers there. So I'm quite excited about that.
Oh, they can definitely take advantage of the exchange rate, so that'll be good, kind of good for them, especially. It makes automatic discounts, built-in discounts without having to do anything else. That's pretty solid.
I'm not complaining. I'll just say that.
Nope.
There you go. There you go. Steve, an absolute pleasure, and thank you for your time. And this allows me to occasionally pretend to people that I can err on the side of professionalism for at least a little bit. So, and now, as soon as you disappear, then I can go back to the ridiculousness, and we'll be back to explaining Chuck and Sticks. I'll tell you why we're at the show. I'll explain it to you. Don't worry.
Okay.
But I do appreciate your time.
Right.
Thank you for the
answers.
No,
not at all. I appreciate the passion, the experience, and the great information I learned from you guys. So look forward to seeing you all next week.
Five sleeps.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's right.
And at the rate we're going, you might have to give Bobby a magazine just so that we don't have to discuss this again.
Just to shut him up.
Just give him his magazine, Steve. Please, just give him his magazine for all of us.
He'll be at the door. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
He's
much
one of my
appreciated.
team doctors. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.